But you see, when the person says or sings or whatever, I've got the power, that's where the problem starts. That's really where it ultimately stems from. That's the root of the problem. Is thinking that you have it in and of yourself. You see, the disciples who remained below during the transfiguration had a problem, right? Someone had brought them a situation. A dad had brought his sick son. They couldn't help him. And we know that they tried, and we know that they failed. And in fact, again, in that parallel account in the book of Mark, it says that when Jesus was approaching and coming down from that Mount of Transfiguration, he saw the disciples disputing with, guess who? The scribes, the Jewish leaders, and probably in a kind of like you guys think, you say you have the answer, and then you can't do this, and like there's all this big dispute. Jesus has to kind of get in there. But the issue, again, was not just the dispute and the kind of public failing that was going on here, which is probably embarrassing, right, to a certain extent. It says in the scriptures that they came to Jesus privately. I probably would have done the same thing. But why had they failed? That was the central issue. Why didn't they have the power to do this? Well, it's the same as the song. They slipped into some form of, I have the power. I don't know if you remember this, but just a few chapters before, Jesus had actually sent the disciples out to do this massive thing of healing. He had sent them out, and he had given them, and he specifically said this, he had given them power. Now, again, that word power over the demons to cast them out. And they did. And they were successful. But when they came back, I don't know if you remember, but Jesus said something to them very important. They came back, they were rejoicing that the demons were subject to them. And Jesus had to kind of take them aside, and he tells them this. He's like, and I'm paraphrasing here, so bear with me. He said, basically, don't rejoice that the demons are subject to you. Because, verily, they weren't. They're subject to Jesus. Right? And he goes on and tells them, if you're going to rejoice in anything, rejoice that your names are written in the Lamb's book of life. And you see, I don't think Jesus would have told them not to rejoice unless they kind of already were, or about to, or tempted to, or something like that. And this is really the kind of, the root of the issue. Whenever we think that we have the power to do God's work, you're headed towards disaster. You're headed towards disaster. Because it's not you. God's power is His alone. It's His unique power. It's above our power. It's all those things I described before, but from the ex nihilo to the physical creation power to His spiritual power. It's above in every way, and He only gives it. He only gives it as He desires, and when He knows that it is necessary for accomplishing His will and His desire. This issue of power came back again and again, if you can think about it, in the lives of the disciples, and even to the time of the crucifixion. If you remember this story, that some of the people were trying to save Jesus from the crucifixion, and He had to tell them, "Don't you know that my Father could?" I guess this is during at Gethsemane. Don't you know that my Father at any time, could lay down 5 legions of angels and take this? But see, it took actually more power and more strength to let His Son go through that. And that's where we get confused. We think God's power is kind of maybe at our beck and call, or that I obviously see how God's power is supposed to be used here, so it should be. And we assess and we make determinations, and we do this thing called assuming how God's power is to be poured out. And we just have to remember, as followers of Christ, guys, it's not about you. It's not about how you think God's power is supposed to be used. It's not how you want God's power to be poured out. It's his power. And he does it in his time. And this is probably a really good lesson for the disciples, as it is with anyone who does any kind of work in ministry. And whether that's formal ministry or informal, if you're a believer, your life is ministry now. And this is a really good word. No matter how many times you've done this or that, no matter how many times you have maybe attended to maybe the ministry of your family, no matter how many times you've attended to or succeeded in the ministry of your work, no matter how many times you've failed or succeeded in whatever ministry in your life, right? You still have to go back to the source and ask for his power to do the thing. There's no such thing in the Christian life, and thankfully so, honestly, as checking the box on God's power. It's something you always have to come back to, and it's kind of like reapplying, like when you apply for a job and you have to kind of like, well, they turn me down this and it's something you would always be kind of reapplying for. Let's see, what is it? I think about a year and a half ago, I was asked by my son's school to lead a little, basically they had like a chapel service, and they wanted me to teach a little 5-minute sermonette on one day a week. And so I agreed, and I was like, oh, this is not a big deal. And I was preparing for it, and I was like, you know what, I think I'm just going to do it for memory. And I'd studied, I'd thought about it and stuff, and I was sitting back there at the time of the service, and I was like, okay, this is going to be great. I'll just kind of, do this thing. And I got up there, and I fell apart. I just completely failed in teaching a bunch of kids about, I forget what, I was usually teaching from the book of Proverbs, and I just lost my mind, basically. I didn't say it very well, it didn't come out, there's just no power, all this stuff. And I went back to sit down afterwards, at that point I'd been teaching these Bible studies for this church for, well over 3 years. I thought I kind of had it, and I went back to my seat, and I was just, it was honestly, it was pretty humbling, right? Pretty humbling. And I go back and I sit down, and I'm talking to the Lord. I'm like, what happened? And the Lord just spoke to me right there, and he said, you didn't pray for me to help you. You didn't ask me to help you. And I was like, oh, man. But I'm so glad that happened to me. I'm so glad that happened to me, because it was such a great lesson in this kind of stuff. You can't walk into anything, whether you think it's low or high matters not. Whether you think it's easy or hard matters not. Are you going to him not checking the box for his power to do whatever, really? So I pray that will be a story of use for you. I know it was a story of use for me.